William Anderson was sitting in his spacious office on the 42nd floor of a skyscraper in the city's business center. His eyes were fixed on the computer screen, where the profitability of one of his supermarkets was glowing with red numbers. "For the sixth month in a row, we've been losing money. This is unacceptable," he said, massaging his temples. "Robert, can you explain to me again why the largest supermarket in a residential neighborhood is making a loss?" Robert Collins, the company's CFO, nervously turned the page of the report. "Mr. Anderson, we've done a detailed analysis. On paper, everything should work. The location is perfect. There is almost no competition. The area is large. But something is going wrong." "Something's not right?" William stood up from his chair and walked over to the panoramic window. "That's not the answer, Robert. I have invested $5 million in this supermarket. $5 million. And what do I get in return? Losses and vague explanations." The office fell silent. Robert nervously stroked his tie, and William continued to look out at the city below. At 52, he had achieved everything he had ever dreamed of: a supermarket chain, real estate investments, his own investment fund. But this supermarket, it became a real pain in the ass. "We hired 3 different consultants," Robert continued. "They all give different recommendations. The first one said the problem was management. The second one said we needed to change the assortment, and the third one suggested a complete rebuild of the store." William turned sharply. "And how much more money do you want to throw away on these consultants?" His voice became hard. "You know what I've noticed in 30 years in business? Consultants are great at writing reports and invoicing, but they never see the real picture." At that moment, there was a knock on the door. Margaret, William's personal assistant for the past 15 years, entered the office. "Excuse me, Mr. Anderson, but you have an investor meeting in 20 minutes. William nodded and suddenly froze. His face changed as if he had an unexpected thought. "Margaret, cancel all my meetings for the next month." "What?" Robert and Margaret exclaimed at the same time. "But, sir," Margaret began, "you have important negotiations scheduled, a presentation of a new project, a meeting with the mayor." "Cancel everything," William repeated firmly, "and prepare new documents for me. In the name of—" He thought for a moment. "William Peterson. No history, no credit history, just a man looking for a job." Robert stood up from his chair. "Mr. Anderson, you're not going to—" "That's exactly what I'm going to do," William interrupted. "I'm going to work in that supermarket. I'm going to work there as a delivery boy. I want to see with my own eyes what's going on there." "But that's crazy," Robert exclaimed. "You're a millionaire, the owner of a company. How are you going to—" "That's exactly why it will work," William smiled. "No one expects to see a millionaire among the movers, and I'll finally understand why a business that should be thriving has turned into a black hole." Margaret and Robert exchanged worried glances. "Mr. Anderson," Margaret began gently, "perhaps we should—" "No," William cut her off. "The decision has been made. Robert, you will temporarily take over the management of the company. Margaret, take care of the paperwork and—" He looked at his expensive suit. "I'll need another wardrobe." He went to the window and looked in the direction of the supermarket. "Do you know what's the worst part?" he said quietly. "It was the first supermarket I ever opened, 25 years ago. I personally chose the location, was involved in the construction, hired the first employees, and now it's dying, and I don't even know why." Robert wanted to say something, but he didn't. William went back to his desk and began to collect his personal belongings. "In 2 days, I have to become a regular unemployed person looking for a job. No one must know about this plan. No one but the 2 of you." "What about your wife?" Margaret asked cautiously. William paused for a moment. Tell her I went to deal with a distressed asset. It won't even be a lie." When Robert and Margaret left the office, William stood by the window for a long time. He realized that his decision might seem crazy, but something told him it was the only way to save the supermarket that had once been his greatest pride. Sometimes you have to go down to the bottom to understand what's going on upstairs, he thought as he turned off his computer. The old Ford Focus pulled into the parking lot of the Fresh Market supermarket. William looked at himself in the rearview mirror. Worn jeans, an old t-shirt, a worn jacket. Margaret had done a good job on his new look. Even his wedding ring had to be removed. Too expensive for a simple, unemployed man. 8 in the morning, he muttered, looking at his watch. Instead of the usual Rolex, the cheap plastic watch felt like a toy on his wrist. Several people had already gathered at the service entrance. William noticed some of them smoking and laughing loudly, exchanging some jokes. I used to personally select every employee, he thought as he walked closer. Are you here? Asked a plump woman of about 45, dressed in a supermarket uniform. Yes, for an interview, William answered, to see the HR manager. Oh, to see Carol. The woman took a drag on her cigarette. 3rd floor, left down the hall. She's the only one who's usually late. William thanked her and entered the building. The familiar corridors looked completely different now. Peeling paint on the walls, burned-out lamps, the smell of cheap air freshener. When did everything get so dilapidated, he thought. Carol was indeed 40 minutes late. A short blonde woman of 35 with bright makeup and a tired look. William Peterson? She didn't even look up from her papers. Work experience. I worked in a warehouse for several companies, William answered with a pre-prepared legend. I've been unemployed for the last 6 months. Why did you leave your previous job? The company went bankrupt. Carol finally looked at him. 52. She grimaced. You know, the job of a longshoreman is quite physically demanding. Are you sure that— I'm in good shape, William interrupted her, and I'm ready to start today. Carol shrugged her shoulders. Very well. We still need people. Minimum wage, 3-month trial period. The schedule is 2 and 2, 12-hour shifts. Sound good to you? 2 and 2? We used to have different schedules, William thought, but said out loud, Yes, I agree. Then go to the warehouse and Nick, the shift supervisor, will meet you there. And don't forget to fill out these forms. She handed him a stack of papers and immediately picked up the phone, indicating that the conversation was over. The warehouse was in chaos. Boxes were piled up to the ceiling, some were torn open, and the contents were scattered on the floor. A forklift stood in the middle of the aisle, blocking traffic. 2 men were arguing near it. I'm telling you, it's broken, one of them shouted. I'm telling you, you're just crooked, the other replied. Hey, new guy. William heard a rough voice. A tall man with a red beard approached him. I'm Nick. Are you from Carol? Yes, William Peterson. Good. See those pallets? Nick gestured to the end of the warehouse. They need to be moved to the refrigerator. By hand, because the forklift broke down again. Where's the protective clothing? Gloves? William asked, remembering the safety rules he had once set. Nick laughed. Listen, if you want to wait until they give you all that stuff, you can wait until you retire. You take it and work with what you have. For the next 4 hours, William carried heavy boxes. His back and arms were aching and sweat was pouring into his eyes. It's been a long time since I've worked so physically, he thought, catching his breath. Hey, Grandpa, aren't you dead yet? He heard a mocking voice. A young man in his 20s with a tattoo on his neck looked at him with derision. What's your name? William asked calmly. Mike. Why? Nothing, Mike. I just wanted to know who was violating safety regulations by overloading the pallets. The smile disappeared from the guy's face. Are you a supervisor? No. I just noticed that you're putting more boxes than allowed. If a pallet falls— Listen up, smart guy. Mike came closer. Mind your own business. Everyone here works as they please. By the end of the shift, William had counted at least 10 serious safety violations, 3 cases of damage to goods due to careless handling and many cases of downtime due to poor work organization. On the way home, he sat in his car for a long time, writing down his observations in a notebook. And this is only the first day, he thought. What will I see next? His phone vibrated. His wife was calling. William looked at the screen and dismissed the call. He couldn't explain anything to her right now. First, he had to figure out what was going on in the supermarket that had once been his pride and now turned into something unrecognizable. Monday began with another scandal. William came to work at 7:30, even though his shift started at 8, trying to get a better understanding of how the early morning logistics worked. Employees were already crowded around the service entrance, but not to start work. Patricia, a middle-aged woman from the packaging department, was arguing loudly with Nick, waving some papers. "This is the 3rd time this month," she shouted. "You've counted the hours wrong again. I worked 4 extra shifts, and there's not a single one on the timesheet." Nick, red with anger, tried to grab the papers from her hands. "Don't yell at me. If you have a complaint, go to Carol in the HR department." Patricia laughed bitterly. "She won't even answer my inquiries. I've been trying to meet with her for 3 weeks." William watched this scene, leaning against the wall. During his week at the warehouse, he had become accustomed to such conflicts, but this time something was different. The other workers weren't just watching, they were supporting Patricia. "I have the same problem," someone in the crowd shouted, "and I've been shorted an hour. This is a mockery." Tony, who was standing next to William, commented quietly, "You know, Bill, once upon a time we had a proper timekeeping system. Electronic cards, everything was clearly recorded. And then the management decided that it was too expensive. Now Nick keeps records in some notebooks of his own, and there are always problems." "How long ago did this start?" William asked, pulling out his notebook. "About 5 years ago. Everything started going downhill," Tony sighed. "First, they removed the electronic system, then reduced the number of employees, but the amount of work remained the same. Then they started saving on everything from gloves to equipment repairs." At this point, Carol, the HR manager, approached the crowd. Her usually indifferent face this time expressed irritation. "What's going on here? Why is everyone standing around? The shift starts in 15 minutes. Here comes our HR manager." Patricia turned to her. "Maybe you can finally explain why people aren't getting paid for the hours they've worked." Carol looked at her coldly. "All questions about pay are handled through official requests. You fill out a form. Give it to me." "We've already overwhelmed you with these forms." A man's voice interrupted her. It was Mark, one of the senior loaders. 3 months ago, I submitted a request for sick leave, and I still haven't heard back." William wrote down every word. He remembered how he had once personally developed a staff motivation system, bonuses for overtime, medical insurance, even vacation packages for the best employees. Where had all this gone? The conflict at the entrance lasted another 20 minutes. Eventually, Carol promised to look into the situation and left, while Nick began to distribute tasks, deliberately giving the hardest work to those who complained the most. "Patricia, today you're working on unloading frozen products." His eyes sparkled with glee. "But that's not my area. I'm working on packaging," the woman protested. "If you don't like it, you can hand in your notice." William felt anger boiling up inside him. This was a blatant abuse of power, but he couldn't intervene. It wasn't time yet. Meanwhile, another drama was unfolding in the warehouse. A new employee, a young man named Alex, was trying to figure out how to use a forklift. "Can someone show me how to use it?" he asked. "You figure it out," Mike said as he walked by. "That's how everyone learned." "But the manual says—" "Forget the manual," Nick interrupted. "Just make sure the product is where it's supposed to be." An hour later, there was a loud crash. Alex had lost control and several cases of expensive alcohol smashed to the floor. "Do you have any idea how much this costs?" Nick shouted. "But that's illegal," the guy tried to argue. "Then write an explanatory note saying that you damaged the goods due to your own incompetence, and you can look for a new job." During his lunch break, William sat down at a table with Tony and a few other employees. The conversation inevitably turned to the morning's conflict. "You know what's the worst part?" said Lisa, a woman from the packaging department. "We used to be like a family. We helped each other, solved problems together. Now it's every man for himself." "It's all about money," added Tony. "When they pay a penny, people start thinking only about how to survive, not about team spirit." "Do you remember Mr. Anderson?" Lisa suddenly asked. At least he understood what respect for employees meant. William almost choked on his coffee. "Who is he?" he asked, trying to speak calmly. "The owner of the chain," Tony explained. "He used to come in often, talk to everyone, and then, they say he only sits in his office now counting his millions." William felt something tighten in his chest. Was he really that far out of touch with reality? In the afternoon, the situation became even more tense. It turned out that a large customer had returned a whole batch of goods due to problems with the documentation. "Who's responsible for the invoices?" Nick thundered. "Don't you know?" snapped one of the employees. "You fill out half the documents at random." William watched this chaos and made notes in his notebook. The system had completely collapsed. Lack of training, poor communication, disregard for safety rules, problems with payroll. And all this was multiplied by a general atmosphere of distrust and frustration. In the evening, sitting in his rented Ford Focus, he spent a long time rereading the notes. His phone vibrated again. This time, it was his wife calling. Again, he did not answer. How could he explain to her that he, a successful businessman, the owner of a supermarket chain, spent his days moving boxes in a warehouse? "The problem is not money," he wrote in his notebook. "The problem is that we have forgotten about people. I forgot about the people." At that moment, he noticed Mike and several other young workers sneaking through the service entrance, even though their shift was already over. Something told William that this was not good, but that would be tomorrow's story. William decided to stay after his shift. The way Mike and his company had slipped into the warehouse was giving him trouble. He hid behind the racks of household chemicals and waited. At first, nothing happened. An empty warehouse, dim light from emergency lamps and the hum of refrigeration units. And then he heard footsteps and muffled voices. "Hurry up! We only have an hour before the guard changes," was Mike's voice. "Are you sure the cameras are off?" someone else asked. "Relax. I made a deal with the guard. He accidentally turned off the power in this area." William cautiously peeked out from behind the rack. In the dim light, he saw 4 figures. They were methodically selecting goods and putting them into large bags. "Take only the expensive items," Mike ordered. "Elite alcohol, expensive cosmetics, electronics. Here's a list from the customer." "The customer?" William tensed. This wasn't just a petty theft of employees for themselves. This was an organized scheme. "What about Nick?" one of the guys asked. "Won't he suspect?" "Are you stupid?" Mike laughed. "Who do you think gives us the lists of goods that are accidentally spoiled or broken? Half goes to him." William took out his phone and began to quietly shoot a video. His hands were shaking, not from fear but from anger. Now he understood why the reports kept showing huge write-offs. "Oh, look!" one of the thieves exclaimed. "A new shipment of iPhones," Mike shouted. "We're not touching them." Carol said they were under special control from the regional office. "And Carol is in on it," William wrote in his mind. The picture was becoming clearer and at the same time dirtier. Suddenly, footsteps were heard in the corridor. The thieves instantly froze. "Who's there?" came the voice of the night guard. but not the one who was in cahoots with the thieves. "Shit, it's the new guy," Mike hissed. "Quick, get everything in the bags and to the emergency exit." William pressed himself against the rack, continuing to film. A security guard walked by, shone his flashlight, and moved on, either not noticing or choosing to ignore him. The next morning, William came to work with a heavy heart. He already knew about the thefts, but the scale of the problem was much larger. It was a whole system involving people at different levels. "You look pale today," Tony noticed as they unloaded another shipment. "I didn't get enough sleep," William replied. "Hey, how long has Mike been working here?" "About 8 months. He came in with a new security guard. They seem to know each other." "Why?" "No reason. I'm just asking." During his lunch break, William sat down at the computer in the break room, ostensibly to check the shift schedule. In reality, he wanted to watch the surveillance footage. But the system showed an error accessing the archive for the last month. "Problems with the server," explained Carol, who happened to be passing by. "Technical problems." Her eyes were too intent and her smile too friendly. In the afternoon, something happened that finally confirmed William's suspicions. A new shipment of expensive alcohol arrived at the warehouse. Nick was personally accepting it. "Yes, everything is fine," he said into the phone. "Of course, I will take into account the write-off. Yes, damaged goods as usual." In the evening, William stayed late to talk to Lisa. She had been working here for 10 years and seemed like an honest person. "Lisa, can I ask you a question? Have you ever noticed anything strange about the inventory write-offs?" The woman tensed up. "Listen, Bill, you seem like a normal person, so I advise you to stay out of this. Everyone here knows everything, but they don't say anything. Everyone has a family, loans, problems. No one wants to get into trouble." "But this is theft," William said quietly. "Isn't underpayment for overtime theft?" Lisa smiled bitterly. "Do you know how many times I've complained about this to the head office? Not a single response. So people take what they can. Some with goods, some with money." William returned to his car and sat for a long time, thinking about everything he had seen and heard. He took out his phone and dialed Robert's number. "Hello, Mr. Anderson." "Robert, I need complete information about all the product write-offs for the last year, all categories, and check on our regional manager. I want to know everything about his contacts with suppliers." "Is it serious?" "More than serious. It seems we're not just victims of theft. It's a whole system of embezzlement, and it involves people we trusted." That night, William hardly slept. He laid out the scheme in his head. Mike and his team steal the goods. Security doesn't notice. Nick writes off the write-offs. Carol covers it up with paperwork, and the regional manager seems to be getting his share of the silence. "But I'm the most to blame," he wrote in his notebook. "I created an environment where honest employees feel cheated and dishonest ones have every opportunity to steal. And the worst part is that I didn't even notice it from my office on the 42nd floor." His phone vibrated again. This time it was neither his wife nor Robert. It was Peter Collins, the chairman of the board of directors. "William, we need to have a serious talk. The board wants an explanation for your absence and the drop in profits." "I'll explain everything, Peter. But not yet. Give me a week." "A week? What are you even doing there? Saving the company." "It's just that not everyone realizes it yet." He hung up the phone and looked at the supermarket in the distance. Tomorrow was going to be a tough day. I had to find a way to gather evidence without giving myself away, and most importantly, figure out how to fix a system that was rotten to the core. Before going to bed, he added another note to his notebook. When a leader forgets about what is happening at the lower levels, corruption begins to flourish there, and the excuse "I didn't know" doesn't work, because knowing is part of my job. The morning shift began with another scandal, this time in the trading floor. William was just unloading a cart with dairy products when he heard loud voices at the checkout. "This is simply unacceptable," an elderly woman shouted, waving her receipt. "I have been buying groceries here for 15 years and I have never seen such rudeness." The cashier, a young girl with bright pink hair and heavy makeup, rolled her eyes. "Listen, if you don't like something, go to another store, and don't hold up the line. What's going on here?" Helen, the store manager, intervened. "That cashier was rude to my mother," explained another woman standing next to her. "And when we asked for the complaint book, she told us to get out of here." William stepped away from his wheelchair and came closer, pulling out a notebook. Okay. Helen tried to diffuse the conflict. "Maggie, go take a break. I'll handle this myself." "But I don't get a break for another hour," the cashier protested. Go now." When Maggie left, Helen turned to the angry customers. "I'm sorry about this incident. Perhaps I can offer you a discount on your next purchase." "A discount?" The elderly woman was indignant. "Just look at your store. Half of the price tags don't match the prices at the checkout. The goods on the shelves are expired and the staff is rude. And you offer a discount?" William continued to observe. He noticed that other customers in line were actively supporting the complainants. "You're right. Last week I bought cheese here. It was already moldy. And they sold me spoiled meat. It's good that I noticed in time. And no one ever apologizes. No one cares." Helen looked confused. She clearly did not know how to handle the situation. During her lunch break, William sat down with her in the cafeteria. "Rough morning?" Helen sighed tiredly. "You know, Bill, I've been working here for 8 years. I started out as a cashier and worked my way up to manager, but lately—" She gave up. "Everything is going downhill." "What has changed?" "Everything. We used to have a clear staff training system. Newcomers were trained for 2 weeks before being allowed to work with clients. And now," she smiled bitterly, "they just come in and go straight to the cash register. No training, no preparation. You'll figure it out as you go along," was the only instruction. After the break, William decided to walk around the sales floor as if he were putting out merchandise. What he saw shocked him even more. On the shelf with canned food, he found cans with dents in them. In the household chemicals department, one of the bottles was leaking, forming a puddle, but no one cared. At the cash register, an elderly woman was trying to make out a price tag that was half torn off. "Excuse me," he said to her. "Can I help you?" "Oh, please," the woman was excited. "I've been trying to figure out the price for 10 minutes. Before, there were always consultants in the hall, but now you can't find anyone." At that moment, another customer approached them. "Excuse me, can you tell me where to find spices? They are not in the usual place." "We've changed the location of the departments," William explained, recalling this from the documents he was reviewing in his office. "And you didn't tell anyone? Great. I've been wandering around the store for half an hour." Later in the afternoon, another illustrative situation occurred. A young mother with 2 children tried to return baby food. "You see, I bought this formula here yesterday," she explained to Helen. "I looked at it at home and it had expired a month ago." "I need a receipt," Helen replied tiredly. "Here is the receipt. But it's not about the money. How could you even put out expired baby food?" William walked over to the baby food shelf and checked the other packages. 5 more were expired. He stayed late that evening to talk to Helen. "Why doesn't anyone check the expiration dates?" She shrugged. "We used to have a whole team responsible for this. Now we have reduced staff and increased the workload. People barely have time to put the goods on the shelves." "And the automatic control system? Barcodes?" "It hasn't been working for 6 months. They said it was expensive to maintain." William took out his phone and dialed Robert. "I need some more information. All customer complaints for the last year, and compare it to the previous years." "Did you find anything, Mr. Anderson?" "Yes, Robert. I found that we're not just losing money, we are losing people's trust, and that's much worse." On the way home, William remembered how he opened this supermarket 25 years ago. Back then, he personally stood at the entrance, greeted the first customers, and asked their opinion. People came back again and again, bringing friends and relatives. The store became a part of their lives. And now it is a place where customers feel unwelcome, where no one cares about their safety and comfort. He wrote in his notebook, "The problem is not competition or location. The problem is that we have forgotten the main rule of business. The customer is always right. And it's not about this particular slogan, it's about respecting the people who have entrusted us with their money and their time." His phone vibrated again. This time it was a message from Robert. Complaint statistics, up 312% over the past year. The main reasons: quality of service, expired goods, price discrepancies. What are we going to do? Nothing yet, William answered. I need to see something else, and it looks like tomorrow is going to be a very busy day. He looked at the supermarket in the rearview mirror. It had once been his pride. Now it was a symbol of how far you can go when you forget your core business values, and fixing it will be much harder than it seemed at first. In the morning, William came to work earlier than usual. He knew that today was the day of deliveries from the main suppliers, and he wanted to follow the process personally. What he saw in the next few hours exceeded his worst expectations. The first truck arrived at 6:30. Nick was already waiting for it, nervously shifting from foot to foot. An unfamiliar man in an expensive suit stood next to him. Is everything as agreed? The stranger asked, handing Nick a folder of documents. Yes, Mr. Richardson. We will accept the goods without inspection. I have already signed the invoices. William tensed up. Mr. Richardson was a representative of one of the largest supply companies, and the procedure for accepting goods without inspection directly violated all possible rules. Great. Richardson took an envelope out of his pocket. Here, as always. And don't forget to give some of it to Carol. She called yesterday to remind me. Nick quickly tucked the envelope into his jacket. William, hiding behind the shelves, took pictures with his phone. Over the next 2 hours, 4 more trucks arrived. The pattern repeated itself. Minimal inspection, signing of documents, and transfer of envelopes. Once William noticed the movers taking several boxes out the back door before the goods were officially accepted. During his lunch break, he called Robert. I need information on all contracts with suppliers for the last year. Pay particular attention to prices and volumes. Is there anything in particular you want me to look for? Compare them to market prices and check if there have been any new intermediary firms. In the afternoon, the regional manager, Richard Walker, arrived at the supermarket. William almost gave himself away. They had known each other for 15 years. Luckily, Walker was too busy doing his own thing to pay attention to the simple loader. Carol, he called, show me the new contracts. They locked themselves in the office. William, who was just unloading goods nearby, overheard snippets of the conversation. The prices are a bit too high. You may have some questions. Don't worry, it's all official. Just a small commission for... What if someone starts digging? Anderson hasn't set foot in this place in 5 years. And the rest of us... William felt the blood rush to his face. Walker, whom he trusted, whom he had personally appointed to the position, turned out to be part of a corruption scheme. Later in the afternoon, he witnessed another telling scene. A female supplier from a small local bakery came to the warehouse. Excuse me, but I'd like to talk to you about our contract, she said to Nick. We've been delivering bread for 3 months now, and we still haven't received payment. All questions to the accounting department, he said. I've been to the accounting department. They told me that all the documents are in order, but the regional manager is holding up the payment. I can't do anything to help. But it's not fair. The woman's eyes welled up with tears. I have a small bakery. I can't work in debt. I need to pay my employees, buy raw materials. Listen, Nick lowered his voice. "There is a way to speed up the process. A small percentage of the amount and everything will be resolved." The woman turned pale. "Are you suggesting I give a bribe?" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just explaining how the system works." She turned and left, wiping away her tears. William wrote down her name and the name of the bakery. He would have to check out the story in more detail. In the evening, he stayed late, ostensibly clearing the rubble in the warehouse. In reality, he was waiting for Carol to go home. As soon as she left, he slipped into her office. The computer was locked, but there were folders of documents on the desk. William quickly took pictures of everything that seemed suspicious: contracts with inflated prices, invoices with discrepancies, strange payment orders. Suddenly, he heard footsteps in the hallway. He quickly turned off the light and hid behind a closet. Carol and Walker came into the office. "Are you sure everything is clear?" Walker asked. "Relax. I took care of the documents. Even if someone starts checking, they won't find anything." "What about this new mover? Bill or something?" "He asks too many questions. He's just an unemployed guy. What can he do?" After they left, William sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about what he had heard. The scheme was simple and effective. Inflated prices from their suppliers, delayed payments for others, bribes, forged documents. And all this was covered up at the level of regional management. Late at night, he met Robert in a small bar on the outskirts of the city. "Here's the data you asked for." Robert held out a folder. "It's not good, Mr. Anderson. There have been 5 new supplier firms in the last year, all registered to shell companies. Prices are on average 30% above market. And small local suppliers, they are being systematically pushed out. Delays in payments, bureaucratic obstacles, termination of contracts under false pretenses." William sighed heavily. "You know what's worse, Robert? I created this system myself. I delegated authority without providing proper control. I trusted people who didn't deserve it. What are we going to do? We're still gathering evidence. But soon we will have to act, because every day of this work is not just lost money. It is the lost trust of people who relied on us." He wrote in his notebook, "Corruption is not just about stealing money. It is the theft of the future, from honest suppliers, from employees, from customers. And the worst part is when it happens with your tacit permission." The phone vibrated again. This time it was the chairman of the board of directors. "William, time is running out. We need an explanation." "Just a few more days, Peter. I'm almost done." "Finished what exactly?" "The investigation. And believe me, the results will shock you." The day started with 3 warehouse workers not showing up for work. Nick was pacing around furiously, checking his phone every now and then. "Where the hell are they?" he muttered. "Today is a big delivery, and maybe they're sick?" William asked cautiously. "Sick?" Nick laughed bitterly. "No, they just moved to a new supermarket down the street. They pay 20% more there." Suddenly, in the far corner of the warehouse, they heard a crash and shouting. Tony, the oldest of the loaders, was arguing with a young worker, Alex. "Are you blind?" Tony shouted, pointing to the overturned boxes. "I spent 3 hours stacking this section." "You shouldn't have stacked them randomly," Alex snapped back. "Who puts goods like that? I've been working here longer than you've been alive." William came closer. The situation was escalating. Tony and Alex were already standing face to face, ready to attack each other. "Guys, maybe," William began, but was interrupted by Tony's shout, "Fuck you! You think you know everything because you're young? And the fact that I've been bending my back here for 15 years is nothing?" Alex pushed his older colleague. "Where are you with your experience? You're still hunching over like a loader. Maybe they just didn't hire you anywhere else?" Tony took a swing, but William managed to get between them. "Stop. Let's just calm down and figure this out. There's nothing to sort out. Tony was breathing heavily, his hands shaking. Some young people came here, impudent. They think they know everything. And they have never heard of respect for elders. Carol came running to the noise. What's going on here? Why aren't you working? Well, an experienced worker is showing us how to store the goods, Alex said sarcastically. He's showing us that everything is on the floor. I don't care who shows what, Carol said. We'll deduct the damaged goods from your salary. Both of them. What? Tony turned white. It's not my fault. It's his fault, I said, both of them. And get back to work before I fire everyone. When Carol left, Tony sank down heavily on the box. God, why did I have to do this? I meant well. 15 years of my life to this warehouse. William noticed that tears were shining in the old man's eyes. During the lunch break, he sat down with Lisa. Do you often have such conflicts? More and more often, she sighed. You see, people are on the verge. The salaries are miserable, the conditions are terrible, and there are no prospects. Older workers hold on to their jobs because where else can they go? And the young people use it as a temporary job. They don't care. At that moment, Nick entered the cafeteria. Okay, listen up, everyone. Due to the fact that 3 people didn't come out, we are working in an intensive mode. Breaks are being cut in half. What? One of the workers was outraged. What about the labor code? If you don't like it, write a letter, Nick barked. I've got a line for your jobs. William noticed that Patricia's hands were trembling as she was about to eat lunch. But I have diabetes. I need to eat on time. I don't know. Work comes first. After lunch, the situation became even worse. Because of the shortened breaks, people were irritated and tired. Queues formed at the cash registers. Cashiers did not have time to serve customers. Hurry up and work, Helen shouted. What are you doing? Try sitting at the checkout for 8 hours without a normal break. One of the cashiers snapped back. Suddenly, one of the employees, Marta, fainted right behind the cash register. Panic broke out. Customers were screaming. Someone called an ambulance. Do you see what you're doing? Lisa shouted at Nick. You're using people like cattle. If you don't like it, quit. He repeated his favorite phrase again. And we will quit, Tony suddenly shouted. We'll all quit. We'll see how you'll work then. William saw many employees nodding in support of Tony. The atmosphere was on the verge of exploding. In the evening, he met with Robert again. Find me the statistics of dismissals for the last year, and check how many complaints were filed by employees with the head office. I already did. Robert pulled out a folder. 42% of the staff quit in the last year. That's 3 times more than usual. And the complaints. There are dozens of them, but they all get stuck at the regional office level. William sighed heavily. You know what's the worst part? These people still believe in the company. Tony has been working in the warehouse for 15 years. Patricia has been at the cash register for 10 years. They could have left a long time ago, but they stay. And how do we thank them? On his way home, he drove past his supermarket again. A group of employees were standing at the entrance, discussing something lively. William parked nearby and listened. This can't go on, Tony was saying. We need to do something. Maybe we should all quit, someone suggested. We have to go to the owner, to Anderson himself. But who will let us go to him? William wrote in his notebook, the most valuable asset of any business is not money, equipment, or even customers. It's the people who come to work every day, no matter what. And when you lose their trust, you lose everything. His phone vibrated. This time, it was his wife. Bill, what's going on? You haven't been home for 2 weeks. I'm sorry, honey. I have to finish this, for the sake of all of us. Finish what? What are you talking about? You'll understand soon enough. And I hope you'll forgive me for my absence. He looked at the group of employees still standing at the entrance. Tomorrow, everything would change. He could no longer watch his company turn into a place where people lose not only their health but also their dignity. In the morning, the supermarket looked different. Brightly colored banners with the words "Grand Sale," discounts up to -70%, new prices, new opportunities, hung everywhere. Promoters in corporate T-shirts stood at the entrance and handed out leaflets. Loud music was playing in the sales area. "What's all this?" William asked Tony as they unloaded another pallet. "Oh, it's our new management who decided to boost sales." The old loader waved his hand. "They invested a lot of money in advertising, hired some consulting company." At that moment, Carol entered the warehouse, accompanied by a young man in an expensive suit. "This is Michael Green, our new marketing consultant," she introduced him. "He's going to give you a briefing." The employees reluctantly gathered around. Michael began to speak, gesturing vigorously. "Friends, today we are launching a large-scale advertising campaign in the supermarket. $3 million of investment, a complete image overhaul, aggressive marketing." "And the salary will be raised?" someone said from the crowd. Michael was embarrassed. That's not my area of expertise. I'm talking about something else. Look at these beautiful banners. Each one of them costs—" "When are you going to update the products on the shelves?" Patricia interrupted him. "Half of our products are expired." "Guys, you don't understand." Michael tried to keep his enthusiasm alive. "We are creating a new brand, a fresh look, an innovative approach." William watched this scene, taking notes. He estimated that the cost of the banners and promotional materials alone exceeded the annual payroll of all the warehouse employees. As the day went on, the situation became more and more absurd. The promoters were inviting people to the grand sale, but when customers went inside, it turned out that the discounts were only for a limited range of goods, most of which were either out of stock or expired. "Where are these super discounts?" shouted an angry customer at the checkout. "In advertising it's one thing, but in the store it's another." "I'm sorry, but the promotional item is over," the cashier explained tiredly. "How is it over?" The commercial had just started. By lunchtime, a crowd of dissatisfied customers had gathered in the sales area. Some demanded a complaint book, others threatened to call the police because of the unfair advertising. William noticed Michael nervously talking on the phone in the corner. "Yes, I understand. No, we did not expect such a reaction. Yes, the banners have already been paid for. No, we can't get a refund." In the afternoon, Walker's regional manager arrived. He called an emergency meeting with the store management. "What a mess!" he shouted. "We invested a lot of money in this campaign. Where are the results?" "Richard," Carol tried to calm him down. "Maybe we should have solved the assortment problems first." "What problems? Couldn't you have prepared properly? Order the goods, organize the staff." "What staff?" Nick demanded. "We have a third of the staff quit, and those who are left are working to the limit." William, who was supposedly wiping the floor nearby, was listening intently. "You know what?" Walker stood up. "I'm not interested in your problems. I invested my own money in this advertising campaign and—" He suddenly stopped talking, realizing that he had said too much. William tensed. The regional manager's personal money in an advertising campaign? This needed to be checked. In the evening, he called Robert. "Check all the payments related to this advertising campaign. I'm particularly interested in the advertising agency and the consulting company." An hour later, Robert called back. "Mr. Anderson, you won't believe this. The advertising agency is registered to Walker's wife, and the consulting company exists only on paper. It's an empty shell. They stole the money, sir. They just funneled it through shell companies. The real value of all the banners and materials is no more than $100,000. The rest is money laundering." William clenched his fists. He remembered how he had personally appointed Walker to the position, how he trusted him, how he considered him an honest man. By the end of the day, the situation in the store had become critical. Customers were demanding refunds, employees were exhausted, and the brightly colored banners with discounts looked like a mockery. "Do you know what's worse?" Lisa said as they were closing the store. "They spent a lot of money on this show and they don't have the basic things. No proper equipment, no uniforms, not even basic respect for the workers." William nodded. He wrote in his notebook, "When a business forgets its essence and starts to show off, this is the first sign of a deep crisis. But the worst thing is when this show becomes a cover for ordinary thievery." On his way home, he received a message from the chairman of the board of directors. "There is an emergency board meeting tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Your presence is mandatory." "I will be there," William replied. "And believe me, I have something to tell you." He looked at the supermarket where the bright advertising lights were still on. "Tomorrow, everything will change. It's time to stop this farce and start real change, even if it meant destroying everything he thought was reliable and proven." The clock read 3 in the morning, but William was still sitting in his temporary home, spreading out documents, photos, and records in front of him. The small kitchen was littered with papers, the result of 2 weeks of undercover work. He was reading his notes for the third time, trying to get a complete picture of how his once successful business had become a corrupt system. The worst part, he thought as he looked at the photos of expired goods, is that it all started with supposedly good decisions. Optimization, efficiency, cost reduction, beautiful words, behind which we forgot about people. At 5 in the morning, the silence was broken by a phone call. William jumped. It was Robert. "Mr. Anderson, I'm sorry to call you so early, but I found something extremely important. You must see it before the board meeting. Where can I meet you?" "There's a coffee shop called Morning Star not far from the supermarket. It's safe and quiet." Half an hour later, they were sitting at a far table. Robert looked like he hadn't slept in days. Red eyes, crumpled suit, hands trembling with exhaustion. "Look," he spread the papers on the table. "I have conducted a full audit of all financial transactions over the past 5 years. What we found earlier was just the tip of the iceberg." He pulled out colorful graphs and charts. "Here's the key point. The board meeting 5 years ago. Do you remember? They adopted a new strategy to optimize costs." William remembered. He had voted for this strategy himself, believing it was necessary to increase competitiveness. "Look at the numbers," Robert continued. "The first step is to reduce staff training costs. The savings are $100,000 a year. It seemed reasonable. But what happened next?" He showed the following graph. The number of errors in handling the goods increased by 300%. The cost of correcting these errors is $400,000 a year, already 3 times the initial savings. William studied the documents carefully. The picture was dire. Salary cuts had led to massive layoffs of experienced workers who were replaced by unskilled newcomers. Refusal to maintain equipment resulted in frequent breakdowns and downtime. Savings on control systems paved the way for large-scale theft. And here's the most interesting thing. Robert took out the last folder. "I checked all the contracts with suppliers. Do you know how much money has been siphoned off through the overpricing scheme? $2 million in the last year, and that's just what I can prove with documentation." "And Walker?" William asked quietly. "Oh, that's another story." Robert smiled bitterly. "He created a whole network of front companies. Here's the scheme. The goods are purchased through an intermediary at an inflated price. The difference is distributed among the participants in the scheme. Part goes to Walker, part to Carol, part to Nick. But the worst part is different." What could be worse? Look at the dates of the appointments. Walker became regional manager just after the new strategy was implemented. He didn't create corruption. He just filled the vacuum that was created after we destroyed the normal management system. William looked at his watch. It was 7 in the morning. The board of directors meeting was in 3 hours. It was the last time he was going to be at the supermarket as Bill's loader. Employees were already gathering at the service entrance. William noticed how their faces had changed over the past 2 weeks. Their fatigue was deeper, their frustration more obvious. "You know what?" Tony suddenly said as the two of them were unloading another pallet. "I was up all night last night thinking, I've given 15 years of my life to this place. And what did you get in return?" William asked cautiously. "Should I really leave? Find something else?" "But," he sighed heavily, "who needs me at my age? And I'm used to it here. You know, this used to be the best supermarket in town. People used to come here to shop on purpose. And now—" Their conversation was interrupted by Nick's shout. "Everyone to the sales floor. Quickly! The head office is checking in." Checking. The usual bustle began. The employees rushed to clean up, put the goods away, and create the appearance of order. William watched this absurd performance and realized that this was the best proof of how deeply rotten the system was. At 9 o'clock, he left the warehouse unnoticed. At home, he took a shower and put on his best Brooks Brothers suit. He looked at himself in the mirror for a long time. Tanned face, calluses on his hands, a new expression in his eyes. These 2 weeks had changed him more than the previous 5 years in the CEO's chair. He looked at his notes again. Day 1. Complete degradation of the training system. Employees do not know basic safety rules. The result is constant injuries, damage to goods, and chaos in the warehouse. Day 3. A system of theft is exposed. Young employees openly steal goods, security guards are at fault, and management turns a blind eye. But the worst part is that everyone thinks it's normal. Day 5. Catastrophic attitude towards customers. Rudeness, indifference, deception. And again, everyone thinks this is normal. Because how can you expect respect for customers from people who don't feel respect for themselves? Day 7. Conflicts between employees have reached a peak. Old versus young, warehouse versus sales floor, everyone versus everyone. A classic example of how a team breaks down when there is no common goal and no respect. Day 10. Corruption permeates everything, from petty theft to large-scale schemes with suppliers. But the worst thing is that this is not a problem of a few dishonest managers. It's the result of a system we've created ourselves. At 9:40, he entered the company's headquarters. The young secretary, who hadn't seen him in 2 weeks, almost dropped her coffee cup. "Mr. Anderson, the board of directors. They're already—" "Thank you, Emily, I know." He smiled for the first time in 2 weeks. He stopped in front of the conference room door. In his pocket was a flash drive with evidence of all the abuses, photos, documents, recordings of conversations. But that was not the main thing. The main thing was the understanding he had come to over the past 2 weeks. He took out a notebook and wrote down his final conclusion. The biggest mistake in business is to think that you can build a successful company by saving money on people. You can deceive the accounting department. You can embellish reports. You can create the illusion of efficiency, but you cannot deceive reality. Sooner or later, it will remind you of itself. And the worst thing is when you realize that you have created a system that destroys everything you have built over the years. It was not thieves and corrupt officials who destroyed my business. I destroyed it myself when I forgot that business is first and foremost about people, their fates, their hopes, their dignity. Now it's time to fix everything, and we have to start by recognizing our own mistakes. He took a deep breath and opened the conference room door. 12 pairs of eyes turned to him. It was time for the truth. William stood before the supermarket employees in the assembly hall. Everyone was there, from the loaders to the cashiers, from the cleaners to the security guards. Only Walker, Carol, and Nick were absent. They were already talking to the police. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began, feeling his heart pounding. "My name is William Anderson, and I am the owner of this supermarket." A whisper went around the room. Tony, who was sitting in the front row, looked up. Bill? You? Yes, Tony. I've been working here for the last 2 weeks as a loader, and you know what? They've been the most important 2 weeks of my life. He paused, looking at the faces of the people, surprised, shocked, some even scared. I know everything, he continued, about theft, about corruption, about the terrible working conditions. But most importantly, I realized why all this happened, and the main culprit is standing in front of you. Lisa, who was sitting next to Tony, shook her head. You mean Walker or Carol? No, I'm talking about me. I created the system that destroyed everything we had built over the years. I agreed to cost optimization without thinking about the consequences. I allowed real people to be turned into numbers in reports. He took out his notebook. Do you know what I wrote here on the first day? The warehouse is in a terrible state. But it wasn't the warehouse. It was that we had stopped investing in people, in their training, in their safety. William turned the page. Employees are stealing goods. But why are they stealing? Because we have created a system where it has become unprofitable to work honestly, where the salary is not enough to live on, where there are no prospects, where your dignity is worthless. A whisper ran through the room. Some looked down, some nodded. But today, everything will change, William said firmly. And I'm going to start with the most important thing, an apology. I apologize to each and every one of you for forgetting the most important thing, the people who come here to work every day. He took out a folder with documents. Starting tomorrow, salaries will be raised by 50%. This is not a gift. It is a fair payment for your work. We are returning all social guarantees, health insurance, overtime pay, bonuses for length of service. We are launching a training and professional development program. We are completely updating our equipment and security systems. Patricia raised her hand. What about the work schedule? Now we work 12-hour days. We're going back to a normal 8-hour working day. And yes, that means we'll need to hire more people, but it's the right investment. And the leadership? Someone in the audience asked. Who will replace Walker and Carol? William smiled. I have several candidates in mind. Tony, how about the position of warehouse manager? 15 years of experience is what we need. The old loader was confused. Me? But yes, you. Because the best managers grow out of those who know the job from the inside. Lisa, you will become the head of the sales floor. Patricia, the customer service department. He looked around the room. But the most important thing is that we are restoring trust. Trust between employees and management, between the store and customers. Because without trust, any business is doomed to failure. Suddenly, Alex, a young loader, stood up. What about those who, took the goods? William sighed. We leave the past in the past. We start from scratch, but, he held up a finger. This is your last chance. No more stealing, no more corruption, no more cheating. We work honestly. He walked to the front of the room. Tony, do you remember what you told me yesterday? That this used to be the best supermarket in town. We're going to bring those days back, but we're going to do it together. Over the next 2 hours, William answered questions, explained the details of the new management system, discussed problems and ways to solve them. People gradually opened up, sharing ideas, suggesting solutions, arguing. When the meeting was over, Lisa approached him. You know, Mr. Anderson, Bill, I've been working here for 10 years, and for the first time in 5 years, I feel hopeful. Hope is good, he replied. But now we have to work hard to justify this hope. In the evening, when everyone had left, William walked around the supermarket once again. He saw it with different eyes now, not as a set of numbers and reports, but as a living organism where every person is important. In his notebook, He made one last entry. Today, a new stage has begun. Not just in the history of one supermarket, but in the understanding of what a real business is. It is not the pursuit of profit at any cost. It is creating a place where people can work with dignity, develop, and see the results of their work. 2 weeks of working as a loader taught me more than 20 years in a manager's chair. They reminded me that there are real people behind every number in the report, and it is these people who determine the success or failure of any business. Now I know what to do, and most importantly, I know who to do it for. He turned off the light and went outside. Tomorrow was the first day of his supermarket's new life, and this time he was sure that everything would be right. William stood at the entrance to the supermarket watching the morning staff change. In 6 months, the changes had touched every aspect of the operation. A modern automated warehouse accounting system was installed. Each product now had its own QR code, and employees used tablets to instantly update information on product availability and placement. Tony, now the warehouse manager, organized a training center. Lisa, the new sales floor manager, implemented a system of smart shifts, flexible work schedules with the possibility of sharing shifts, extra breaks for employees with difficult areas, staff rotation to prevent monotony, weekly meetings to discuss problems and suggestions. Patricia completely rebuilt the service system, introduced a loyalty program with real benefits, created a customer support service around the clock, organized a system for collecting and analyzing feedback, launched a service of personal consultants for regular customers, but most importantly, the atmosphere changed. It was no longer just a supermarket, but a place where people were happy to work and shop. William smiled as he recalled his days as a loader. Sometimes the best view of a business comes from the bottom, and the best decisions come not from graphs and reports, but from understanding the real needs of real people.